Okay, so for Lab 7, we are going to be setting up our initial vCenter configuration. Remember that you have to power on the VMs in a very specific order. You want to do your DC, your VC, then your two ESXi hosts. The VC has to come before the ESXi hosts because that's where we installed our virtual software and our virtual iSCSI SAN last lab. So I'm going to go and maximize my screen and log in. This is the first time logging into it after our iSCSI SAN setup. So we want to make sure things like the console loads, first and foremost. We want to make sure that our drives are loading. For whatever reason, after our iSCSI setup, disk management loves to keep loading up, and I'm not quite sure why. But as you can see, both of our iSCSI drives are there, iSCSI 1 and 2, drive S, drive T. Both have about the same amount of space free, which that's appropriate. So once you verify that, just go ahead and close it. Our StarWin Management console is running, but not opened, so go ahead and open it. One thing that I've noticed, and I'm not quite sure why, it could just be the software, but when we first log in, and you go to connect, you may or may not receive an error. If you receive an error, what I've noticed is, just give it a few minutes. Because the first several times I did this lab, it would not connect. I just kind of gave it 5 or 6 minutes, more like 5 minutes, and then it would actually connect. Keeping in mind we're doing nested VMs, so sometimes our nested VMs have problems. So both of our LUNs are there. So that was one of the major things we wanted to make sure was happening. Alright, so once we see that they're there, we are done. Go and close out of it. We want to open up our vCenter web client. It should be under Start, All Programs, VMware. Now go down to VMware Web Client. I'm just going to make a shortcut to our desktop. Make it a little easier. If it's the first time, you'll may have the Internet Explorer 11 pop-up screen. It doesn't always happen, but it may or may not be there. We do not have a valid certificate, hence there's a problem with our certificate screen. By habit, it's more information. I'm sorry. Also, you'll notice that it shows local host. You could also type in the IP address 192.168.246.20. Whatever the IP address is of the vCenter server. That way, if you're doing it via IP address, you can do it from any of our virtual environment. Localhost, this again goes back to your local machine. So by default, I love to just go by IP address. You can also go by its domain name, since within our virtual environment we have DNS set up. I'm going to go ahead and continue to this website. In a production environment, you probably are going to have a certificate. You may get a few errors like Flash is not installed. Go ahead and download Flash. Okay, I went ahead and installed Flash, so I'm going to connect to the website, or continue to the website. The web instance is kind of slow, so you do have to bear with it. Okay, our username. Since we don't currently have single sign-on set up within our Active Directory, we have to use the default username and the password we set up while installing this. The default username is administrator at vsphere.local, and whatever password you were instructed to set. In our class, it was password with a capital P, $1. If single sign-on was enabled, we could actually just use our Windows session authentication, but currently our Active Directory is not set up to allow this. That's on a later lab. When you log in, the authentication process doesn't normally take too terribly long, but it kind of just depends. You may receive a certificate error. It's okay, ignore the certificate error. You also may get that there are items expiring. That's because we only have 39 days left in our free trial. That's okay for our lab environment. We will, when it expires, we will actually be setting up a new key. You'll also notice that we have a health issue. Again, that is our key. So I'm just going to acknowledge it and reset it to green. We're going to be adding this to, or we're going to be adding our ESXi hosts to vCenter. Because you'll notice, currently we have one vCenter server, but nothing else. It should tell you to navigate to our hosts and clusters, and our ESXi hosts are not here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new data center. We're going to call it training. Underneath training, we're going to add our hosts. If you know the IP address, you'll type the IP address in. If you know the name, you can do the name. I happen to just remember the IP address. That makes it a little easier. Again, you could type in the host name if you'd prefer, which is ESXi1.vida.local. Then it's going to ask you for its root username and password to verify that we have access to that ESXi host and they're authorized to actually add it to our vCenter setup. First time we did this, you'll notice that it won't be able to verify the authenticity of the host because we've never connected to it. We don't have its certificate yet. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes. The first time you do this, you'll always get this message. You could actually also import their certificate. More complex, but always an option. It will give you the IP address, the vendor name, the model. If we were not doing this in a virtual nested environment, that would actually be the type of server it is. And if there's virtual machines running on it. Currently there are no virtual machines, so we'll ignore it. If we had a product key. We currently do not have a product key. You'll notice it will expire in April 30th. Within our environment, it is okay. Interesting thing to note here. Total CPUs 2, total VMs 0. If we had VMs, they'd be there. This free license allows us to do a maximum of 1 core and allows us 2 CPUs per unit. If we were to put a license key in here, it would give you exactly what you're able to do. Do we want to enable lockdown mode? In a normal production environment, I would say yes. However, in our lab environment, no, because we're going to be using SSH to do some of the managerial items. So we're not locking it down. Where do we want to put it? We only currently have one data center, which is called training, so we're going to be putting it underneath training. If we had multiple training data centers, training just being one of them, we would just put them in the appropriate item. For example, for the college, I would imagine we have one for each campus, and so we also have a training one, but that way the ESXi hosts are going to be going into the appropriate data center depending on their location. But again, it depends on your environment. Once we're ready, verify all of it, and we're going to click finish. If you want to verify that the SSH or that the SHA-1 certificate matches, you could actually log into our ESXi hosts to verify. Normally it's not an issue as long as you're verifying the addresses and whatnot. Okay, you'll notice that it is adding. It's at 80% right now. Once that is done, we'll add the second host. Sometimes, especially within our nested virtual environment, it has issues. I'm going to be adding a second host. 192.168.246.22. Again, it's going to verify our username and password. It will also try to connect to its SHA-1, verifying that this is the correct server that we want to do. And if we're sure we do want to connect to it, yes, we do. Again, if it had a virtual machine, it would be listed. If we had a license key, it'd be here. Don't enable lockdown mode because, again, we're managing this through SSH, so we don't want to do that just yet. Where do we want to put it? Underneath training. Verify that's all what we want to do, and when we're ready, click finish. And again, it will take a few minutes to add the host. Okay, so now we'll go and expand out training. You'll see that we have both hosts via IP address. If we added them via name, it would be their name. If you actually double click on them, we can drill down into them, which that's what we want to do. We want to do the first one to see just kind of what it has. We actually want to be doing some maintenance on it. The web menu can get kind of laggy, so do keep that in mind. We're going to be configuring our time server, so that should be under manage. But normally what I say is go through each of the tabs so we kind of have a general idea of what each tab looks like. I'm going to go ahead and maximize my screen just so we have the full view of everything. Notice valuation mode because we don't have a product key. Our monitoring would actually be our real life view of resources. And then you could also see resource allocations, storage reports, and items like that. When we get into the troubleshooting, that's where the performance screen comes in. That way we can start seeing bottlenecks. But you can see things like the resource allocations, hardware status, any of the events, sensors, all the good stuff. This is really good information for troubleshooting. We're going to go to manage, and this is where we'll manage all of our major items. And we are looking for our time configuration. Notice that our NTP client is disabled and our service is stopped. we're going to go ahead and edit it. We want to enable a NTP client, so we're going to go ahead and start it. And we want to start and stop with the host. Next, you'd go out and find NTP servers. That way you can find the most appropriate server for your area. Nice thing here is you can actually do multiple addresses. So what I did was I just went to NTP pool, and that way I was able to pull up a few different servers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 4 servers, 0.pool@ntp.org, 1, 2, and 3. And those are going to be the machines that I want to have it connect to. And when you are sure that's what you want to do, click OK. You'll notice that the task will take effect in a second. And we are good to go. Okay, so now that our first server is set up, we're going to go back and we're going to do our second server. However, I'm going to do it a different way. Because I've been doing it through our hosts and clusters. That's just one way. I'm going to do it through our inventory list for the second host. I'm going to go down to our hosts. Again, we've already configured the first one, so I'm going to configure the second one. And you notice it takes you right there. I'm going to edit it, manual, I'm going to start it. I want to have it start and stop with the host. And again, I want to put in the 3 pools that we're going to be using. And apply it. So you have to keep in mind, this is just one way of doing this. This is done through the web interface. We could actually be doing it through the individual client interface. It just kind of depends on the method that you want to do it. So I'm going to show you a second method just to verify, but we've got to download an extra item. So if you go to the IP address of any of our hosts, again, we don't have a valid certificate, so it is okay, continue to it. You should get the website for the individual ESXi hosts. I want to download the standalone vSphere client. And you'll notice the size is fairly large. So I'm going to go ahead and, you know what? For our environment, I'm just going to run it. They are on a gigabit backbone, so it should be extremely fast. But this is going to allow us to manage it through a client versus a web portal. And there's a slight difference between the options and menus and the interface. So I wanted to show you guys how to do the same thing both ways. So once it's done downloading, it'll actually have you install it. The nice thing with this is you need to be familiar with both tools, because each tool will give you specific types of access. They actually want you to use the web client directly. However, the web client is not always the best. The web client is kind of laggy, and sometimes it doesn't give you the control that you want to. So that's why I want to show you both ways. The installation though is slow and does take a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it, that way you don't have to go through it, but we're just doing a default installation, nothing fancy. Okay, so after a few minutes it finished. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of our web portal. You'll notice that we have a vSphere client, which is different from the web client. You'll also notice the interface is different. We could log in directly to individual machines, or we can log in directly to our vCenter client. It just depends on what you want to do. Sometimes I've noticed that if I'm dealing with just a issued ESXi host, I can log into the host directly and fix it that way without having to go into the vCenter client first. Again, our account is administrator at vs.local. If you get the certificate warning, okay, again, we're just going to ignore it. I'm going to click on install the certificate and ignore it from later. It also helps if you spell all of it correctly. Administrator at vsphere.local. Again, just like the web client, it will let us know that we have an expiring license or evaluation license. But notice the interface slightly different. We want to, if we were going to add the hosts, it'd be hosts and clients. It'd be the same way that we did it through our web client. It's just this is a slightly different view. If we want to add, for example, our NTP servers, you'd go to whichever item that we want to manage, and here we're looking at configuration. Again, a slightly different view, but from here, time configuration. You'll notice that if it's a different time, for example, this is in red, it is the correct date, it is not the correct time. So it will actually give you a message saying, hey, this is not correct. So I want to go to its properties, and those are the pools, that's all correct. I'm going to go ahead and correct the time. I'm going to correct the time on both of them. That's actually why we use NTP, is so that our time is not incorrect. However, sometimes it happens. The last step in our lab was DNS and routing. The web client actually does not show this, so we have to be in our actual client to see this, our non-web client. but that is just the address, its DNS, its name, all the information that we may need to know. It has nothing for IPv6 currently, but we just want to verify that. The name, all of that good information. I want to double check the first one just to make sure. Its name, its domain, its DNS, its search domain, its gateway, which that's all good information. Remember that we have two clients now. We have our web client and our normal client. Both allow you to manage vCenter. It's just they give you slightly different views. So sometimes you have to know which view you want to use. Also, the web client is a little slower, but has more detail. This client does not. This client's a lot faster and a lot smoother, but it's not as pretty. But it doesn't have all the same functionality. So it kind of just depends on what you're doing. I want to thank you guys and have a great day.